First of all, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here today. And I want to thank, in particular, the Barb and all the team at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children at the University of Western Ontario, and also the CLC and Vicki for, to both of those offices really, for providing us with so many resources and so much support in getting the DV at Work project going in Newfoundland and Labrador. So, great big thank you from all of us to all of you. The DV at Work Newfoundland project was developed to address the knowledge gap concerning the impacts of domestic violence on workers and workplaces in Newfoundland and Labrador. Given that women are the more likely victims of domestic violence, the St. John's Status of Women Council was determined to know more about the domestic violence they experience and the ways it impacts their economic independence. We know that reported incidents of domestic violence in the province are rising, and research is desperately needed to inform new legislation, policies, and programs to better respond to domestic violence. We also know that women experiencing domestic violence have a more disrupted work history, frequently moving from job to job, often taking casual and part-time jobs, all resulting in lower and precarious annual incomes. But we also know that being employed is a key pathway to leaving abusive relationships, to providing a home and a decent standard of living for women and their children. So the research was, I wish I could see it. I can't read French. Can I turn the mic? Okay, great. So, So this is what we're working on is a 36-month project, and it follows up from the CLC 2014 Pan-Canadian survey conducted by the CLC, of course, and the University of Western Ontario. It addresses phase one. Oh, great, thank you. Phase one involves an online survey on the impacts of DV on workers and workplaces. And we followed up. Once we got the survey released, we started a qualitative component of the research, which was focus groups and roundtables, public roundtables. The focus groups weren't public. And we also did some community meetings, and we did some one-on-one interviews as well. So phase two of we're just ending phase one right now. Phase two, we're going to develop some resources for employers and victims of DV to support the recently announced domestic violence leave that was approved last fall by Cabinet. And in phase three, we're going to pilot those resources, those workplace resources, with some employers throughout the province. So one of the first things that we did, we made a bunch of changes to the CLC survey, and one of the first changes that we did was to align the definition of domestic violence with the provincial government's violence prevention initiative, the definition that they were using. So basically, we expanded it to include any form of physical, sexual, verbal, cultural, spiritual, emotional, or psychological abuse, including financial control, neglect, stalking, and harassment. And that the violence occurs between opposite or same-sex intimate partners who may or may not be married, common law, or living together, and that the violence can also continue to happen once the relationship has ended. So we added a bunch more questions to the survey as well, and we can talk about those later. But it was really important to us to make the survey relevant to the province, because when it was done, as we know, when the CLC did the Pan-Canadian survey, the take-up in some of the smaller provinces was very, very small, and that was true of Newfoundland and Labrador as well. So we wanted to do our best to try and correct, to improve the participation wherever we could. But we also tried a survey of our own. Before I started working on this domestic violence project, I worked in government in executive council, and we tried to do a provincial survey on violence and couldn't get enough representation of Indigenous women to do any kind of a solid analysis on the data. So, in that, and the survey was virtually abandoned for a bunch of reasons, but that was certainly one of them. So we didn't want to go down that road again. And so we set out to do everything that we could to improve the participation of Indigenous women in the survey and in the research as a whole. So one of the joys of doing this research is that we get to use the word feminism, which is very difficult for some people in some settings, but we get to do that, and it was really important, that the St. John Status of Women Council undertake this research, because we could go out and say that, primarily, given what we know about domestic violence, that this research is done about women, for women, about women, and to address and reduce the inequalities that women experience in their day-to-day lives. And also in our approach, that we could call our approach a feminist approach to research and call our methodologies feminist methodologies, to say that we encourage all women to participate, and that, in fact, we were going to go out of our way to make sure that women, regardless of where they lived in the province, regardless of their access to the internet, regardless of the language they speak, or methodologies too, that we would use a survey, we'd use focus groups, we'd use round tables, whatever we had to do to make sure that women had an opportunity to have their voice heard. So in addition to the online survey, we also went to some locations around the province where we know that women, in particular some of the Indigenous communities on the north coast of Labrador, where they don't have solid internet service for very long. It took about 35 minutes to complete the survey, and if the internet times out, then you're back to ground zero. So we went up to one of the northern Inuit communities and did a closed focus group with them, and brought print copies of the survey with us. We did that in a couple of other locations as well. We also, our other principles about research being conducted through consultation and partnership, I'll talk about that too, and research outcomes, that are shared, that circle back to these organizations and to the women in them, in the communities. So overall, we ended up with quite a few partners in this project, different types of partners, but I need to identify who they are, because the Newfoundland and Labrador Federation of Labour did a lot of the primary work to get this project underway in the province, and did a lot of advocating with government about legislation, not just for DV leave, but also in some of the areas of occupational health and residential tenancies as well. The University of Western Ontario, of course, all 7 Status of Women councils in Newfoundland and Labrador were our partners and helped us organize some of our community meetings and roundtables. We did 3 focus groups at 3 transition houses. The rest of them, the Office to Advance Women Apprentices and the Indigenous Women's Organization, although the Indigenous women did also help us organize some of our community meetings. The Multicultural Women's Organization, Government of Newfoundland and Labrador Women's Policy Office, the Canadian Federation of Students, and Unifor FFAW, they all distributed the online link for the survey. So, and they were and have been and continue to be supportive of this research. So, in terms of outreach, what we did was a series of community consultations on the survey content itself prior to its release online. And we did that with some of our Indigenous organizations as well. We did 11 community meet. Once the survey went online, then we started doing all the qualitative work around the community meetings. We did 10 focus groups, including with multicultural women, refugee women, in particular, one specifically with women from Syria. And we spent 2 afternoons with sex workers, and then we spent another evening with them and had supper. For them to, that was another situation where we used the print copies of the survey. And we also did focus groups in 3 shelters. The 3 public roundtables, and of course one of those was specifically for Indigenous women. And we also, at the end of the survey, we offered the people filling it in, if they wanted to say more, that they could contact us. So. And we had 4 women who contacted us about that and wanted to do a follow-up interview. So now I'm going to talk about some of the findings. So the survey basically came down at the end of January. So these are kind of hot off the press. And this is some of the things that we found through the survey itself. That we had 1,567 people complete the survey, 89% female, about 10% male, and 1.5% trans. 42% of respondents had dependent children, 9% had other dependent family members, like elders, older seniors. 86% of respondents were born in Newfoundland, 9% were Indigenous, 5% identified as a person of color. 58% were permanent employees, and of those, 51% were unionized. 54% of respondents experienced domestic violence from an intimate partner. That's much higher than the national figures, right? 55% from women, and 31% men, and 60% Indigenous people. 38% of those experiencing domestic violence said it had influenced their career choice or career path. This was another question that we added because we wanted to know if people who experience domestic violence, if that experience of domestic violence influenced their careers in any way. Either their career path, their career choice, or their career trajectory. So this is something that we want to follow up on with some more research as well. 47% said they took time off work because of DV. 42% reported that the DV continued in the workplace. Mostly from abusive phone calls and text messages. Abusive persons stalked or harassed them or made a disruptive personal visit. Over 84% of the survivors reported that domestic violence negatively affected their work performance. That's really high too. 51% of DV victims said they confided in and received support from a coworker. And 60% said that their coworkers were negatively affected by the DV. The rest of these you'll get in the package. So, but what's also interesting is 70% of respondents also said that they didn't report the DV to the police. We always thought it was 80-20, you know. For years we were saying 80-20, but now we know that it's that there is a bit more reporting going, happening, right? Which is good. One of the women who came forward and wanted an interview, I just want to read this and then I'm done. It was about a woman, Marie, and she was an Indigenous woman. Most of the murders from domestic violence in our province, unfortunately, are Indigenous women. And Beth was a nurse at a clinic, and this is what she had to say. She said, Marie did everything she could to alert those around her at the clinic that she needed help. She told managers and coworkers. She asked for cameras to be installed. She asked for support getting to and from work. She sent emails about the general safety of the building, especially that you couldn't see who was approaching the building at the main entrance. None of this worked. Marie's ex-partner pulled up in front of the clinic, and they had no idea that he was coming in with a gun. They had just finished their lunch, and Beth had gone into the washroom to brush her teeth. And then while she was in there, she heard the shots, and she peeked out only to see Marie on the floor. She heard her partner pacing back and forth near the reception desk yelling, "Are you happy now?" Then she heard another shot when he shot himself. She ran across the road to an elementary school, which was locked down immediately, and she spent the next 9 months on leave. Today, six years later, Beth is a strong advocate for safer workplaces for nurses. In particular, that the doors be kept locked so they can buzz people into the clinic, but she can't get any support for it. She was told the likelihood of this ever happening again is so slim. Nurses are being told that they have to be nicer. But the union tells nurses, don't go to the manager when something violent happens, call the police. She said, we've endured this all these years. So going forward, we're going to be developing and piloting some workplace resources, and Beth has asked us if she can be a part of that. And of course, we said yes. And she also wants to advocate for maybe piloting some of those in her clinic. The police in Liab West have also offered to be a pilot site for our resources. And our third location, we still haven't determined yet, but we're looking forward to it. Okay, thank you so much.
So my name is Crystal Giesbrecht, and I am speaking about the research that we did in Saskatchewan. Because of the disruptions to employment common to the experience of intimate partner violence, women who have experienced it have had lower incomes, more likely to work in part-time or casual work. And we might have known this anecdotally, but until recently, there wasn't a lot of data on this. So as Peter summarized for us this morning, the study Can Work Be Safe When Home Isn't was conducted by Western University and the CLC. And since then, there have been other national level surveys done in other countries. In 2016, PATHS was working on a 3-year project which included a pilot project with a Saskatchewan employer and delivery of the Make It Our Business training program in Saskatchewan. And as part of that, we conducted research in our own province. We started with a survey that was circulated by our member agencies, which are domestic violence shelters and counseling centers, partners in the labor movement, shared on social media and via email. We had 437 responses to that survey, and we also did qualitative research, which included focus groups with survivors, managers, workers, and union representatives. And we also did one-on-one interviews for people who lived outside of the centers where we conducted the focus groups, or for people who felt more comfortable doing it one-on-one as opposed to attending a focus group. So here are just some of the key findings from our survey. First, we noticed, or I should back up and say, we asked, have you ever experienced intimate partner violence in our survey? So 48% said no, 46% said yes, and then another 6% said not sure. If they said not sure, we had a blank. Please explain. And they wrote things like, yells and screams at me but doesn't hit me. Still abuse. So when we reworked the math, we got 50% had experienced violence. But it's worse than that, because we also had a list of 25 abusive behaviors going from low-level physical violence to control to workplace abuse, sexual violence, strangulation, whole list. And we asked, have you ever used these behaviors on your partner? Has your partner ever done these things to you? 64% of survey respondents had experienced something on the list. And high levels of violence or severe forms of violence were experienced by people who did not check off, I experienced intimate partner violence. So what this tells us is that if people aren't clear about what is abuse and what we count in that, they might not reach out for help when it's happening to them. And if it's happening to someone they know, they might be less likely to offer a supportive response. So we have to keep that in mind when we're doing our education around this topic as well. We saw that I'm on a different. No, it's okay. I'll go back. There was a stat I think was missing out of the middle there. I got confused, sorry. So 83% of the people who had experienced violence had been impacted at work. And that goes all the way from being distracted and not being able to focus on their work to missing time because they're sick, they're upset. I'll show you more of those specific details too. Something else is that 12% had lost a job, and even more than that are people who are quitting jobs because of intimate partner violence. So for some people, they are embarrassed by their partner coming to work and causing a scene, or they're feeling badly about their own performance slipping and they might be getting reprimanded. So one thing we heard is people saying things like, I quit before I got fired. So I know that the print there is small, but just to give you an idea of some of the workplace impacts experienced by people who answered our survey. So 83% unable to concentrate. That's the largest. 74% said they were unable to perform to the best of their ability. 61% had called in sick. We also see people going homesick, making a mistake at work, being afraid to leave work, feeling that their coworkers were getting annoyed with them, being reprimanded at work, quitting a job, being unable to go to work because they were injured, losing their job, or causing or almost causing an accident at work. And keep in mind here, we're asking people who were experiencing violence, not people who were using violence, and we've still got that threat of a potential accident happening. And our survey included open-ended questions as well. So people gave us qualitative responses and told us more about their experiences with those particular things. And then we heard more stories about it when we did the qualitative piece of the research. So we heard stories of the extreme fear and danger that people were subjected to in their workplaces, where their partner was showing up at the job site, following them when they were out in a work vehicle doing their job. Times when they should have received support in the workplace, but coworkers or managers wanted to fix it. And when the survivor wasn't ready to leave the relationship or to make a change right now on the timeline of others, then sometimes that caused a rift in the relationship. So again, all of these things can tell us a lot about what we can do in terms of our education in the workplace. One survivor particularly talked about the response she got from her manager. Her performance was down, her numbers were down, she said, and her manager said, you know, you've got to get this stuff dealt with. We want to see the old you back, not what's going on right now. And she felt like she had to deal with this and deal with it quickly, or her job would be at risk. So, there's the stat that I was looking for earlier. There we go. But 49% of survey respondents said that they had known or suspected that someone else was, or that someone they worked with was experiencing violence. But a very small number, only around 13%, had actually reported it to management or someone else in the workplace. So that tells us something about the education we need to do. And this is quite shocking, I suppose, is when we ask, does your workplace have a policy on intimate partner violence? The majority of respondents were unsure. So even if the company is doing something good to deal with the problem, if workers don't know, then it doesn't go anywhere. So getting the education in place and having the policy posted and passed along to the employees is a key piece. So talking about the focus groups and the interviews that we did, this is just a really brief summary of those qualitative responses. So the focus groups and interviews, the data gave us 4 themes. Those are the first 2 on the screen there. So in terms of the impact of intimate partner violence in the workplace on survivors, participants spoke of their own experiences of violence, and then they also spoke of what they observed in coworkers. We heard of stalking and threats and harassment at the workplace, physical injury, financial challenges, and we also heard of work challenges like relationships with coworkers, work performance, and that people really wanted to continue working despite the violence they were experiencing, and that work was helpful. It's abundantly clear that work is a protective factor, not just because of the financial aspect, but because it's a safe place. It's a place where you can get a break. It's a place where you can use the phone, where you can access supports, and self-efficacy. Someone had recalled that her coworker who was experiencing violence said to her, "This job is one thing I'm good at, and I like it, and I don't want him to take that away from me." And that was a theme that we heard was, this is a place where you can be effective and do something you feel good about, but then when your performance goes down and you can't do your best, that's really, really harmful. Interventions in the workplace. This is where participants told us about the interventions they were seeing, sometimes good responses from management and sometimes unhelpful responses from management. They also told us about workplace policies that were in place where they were working and their own awareness of what was in their workplaces or things they were aware of that they thought could potentially be helpful. The importance of training is a really big theme. And this is important for changing the culture. And this is something that our participants talk to us about, the need to change the culture so that it's taken seriously in the workplace and so people know that it's safe to come forward. Everyone in the workplace benefits from learning how to recognize and respond to intimate partner violence and knowing what services are available and knowing that before it happens so that then you're prepared to deal with it. Participants also talked about the importance of legislation. At the time when we were conducting the research, only Manitoba had legislation in place. So participants were saying, I heard about this in Manitoba, and that would be a really good thing if we had that here in our own province. So that was coming up. And specific things like OH&S and leaves, and if you could just go to court or get counseling on work time, how helpful that would be. So those sorts of policy suggestions were coming to us there as well. This is just one quotation from a survivor that we like to share. This survivor, she was going through a lot of sick time. She was missing work. There were financial penalties for her in her workplace. And she went on to say that she knew that managers knew that something was going on. Maybe they didn't know it was domestic violence, but they knew there was something going on. But no one asked her, "Hey, what's happening? Can we help you?" And no supports were offered. So it took a very long time for her to be able to get out of the situation she was in. With our report, with the research we did in Saskatchewan, we also did a comprehensive research report that had a literature review. And in that, we included a summary of some of the information from the Pan-Canadian survey, research on men who use violence. We also highlighted what we knew at this time about the economic impact of violence. So we repeatedly, in our training on this topic, cite the statistic from the Department of Justice Canada study that showed us, using 2009 data, that the cost of DV to employers was $77.9 million. So now, 2019, $92 million. All the time we use that. That's in the report. Also something that we included in our literature review, but also are always sharing in training, is the economic analysis from Australia done by Stanford, which showed that if a domestic violence leave was in place, only around 1.5% of female employees and 0.3% of male employees would use that leave. So the cost of that is so much smaller than the cost to employers and the overall GDP of the cost of domestic violence. So in the literature review, it was really important to share all of that because we wanted it to be a comprehensive resource so that when we were sharing it with decision makers and partners, they had all of the information in one place. So the other piece was a review of the legislation. At that time, Ontario had OH&S legislation in place, and as I said, Manitoba had domestic violence leave. So since writing this report at the end of 2016, we've seen the amazing progress and how many places have implemented legislation since. So I actually did an update to this report just at the end of 2018 so that it is up to date. And I know it'll change again, but in terms of sharing this with our partners and decision makers, then they can still refer to it and everything is in one place for the time being. We also sped up getting this report finished because right around the time we were completing the research in Saskatchewan, the government of Saskatchewan was consulting, and PATHS was part of that, on looking at potential for an intimate partner violence leave in our province, looking at what legislative options could be put in place. So we quickly got this into their hands so that it would hopefully be able to provide some information that they could use in their decision making. So the recommendations were a really key piece of this. Because when we do research in the community, our goal isn't just to highlight the problem, but to point directly to what can we do about it and what are some concrete actions and recommendations that are going to help. So the recommendations came directly from what the research participants told us and direct result of the findings of both the survey and the focus groups. And we have recommendations for federal government, provincial government, employers, managers, workplaces, unions, people who are using violence, people who are experiencing violence. That's all in the report if you're interested to read it. But another thing that I'll tell you in terms of what I think some of the importance of doing this community-based research was that even though we had the national pan-Canadian survey, doing our own research in Saskatchewan added to what we knew. It's still a relatively small body of data on this topic, but having our own research that we'd conducted gave us the ability when we're doing training and when we're doing education that we could say, and here's what we did in our province, these are the numbers, and it showed those that we were training the significance of the problem, here at home, and it had a big impact. We also launched this report with a media event that was quite well attended, and we got a number of media interviews. And then stemming from that, when there's changes happening in other provinces, legislation that's come into place, federally regulated workers, that leave that is coming or has come into place, we have been asked to do interviews and talk about that as well. And every time that happens, this is in the media in our province, and it's raising more awareness of the impact of domestic violence in the workplace. So that has been something that is really positive. So there on the last slide, you can access the report as well as the summary of it on our website, and that's a copy of the infographic that we did with some of our survey results. We also have some postcards as well that I'll set out at the front, and that is all from me on the research, so I'll pass it off to Joanne.
Thanks, Crystal. So throughout today and last night, you all heard a lot about what employers can do and a little bit about what businesses can do in terms of supporting victims of intimate partner violence. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what CBOs, community-based organizations, including shelters, can actually do to help employers deal with the issue of intimate partner violence. You've heard this mentioned throughout the day that we're not expecting employers to become experts on intimate partner violence because there are organizations out there that do this work every day, and we are more than willing, extremely willing to help, to be consulted and to come out and assist before incidents happen, and also certainly when a crisis is happening within your organization. Most cities or larger urban areas will have women's shelters. Smaller communities would likely have professionals doing this work, either through victim services, through the RCMP, or potentially through a health center. So those would be your local experts that you would want to connect with. Some of the things that the community-based organizations can do is explain what is intimate partner violence. I know you've seen the definition several times throughout the day, so I'm not going to repeat that. But this is the kind of information that people who don't do this work on a daily basis sometimes don't understand. We've certainly heard that often what people think of as domestic violence is the punch in the face that results in a black eye, and we know it is so much more than that. So experts in the field can talk to lay people about what is intimate partner violence. What are the warning signs to look for? How can you recognize it when it's happening to somebody that you know? How can you overcome your hesitation to help? Because oftentimes people do still feel that it's a private family matter. They don't want to get involved. And we think that it's really important that people recognize that abusive relationships will only get worse without intervention. And often isolation of the victim is one of the most powerful things that keep them stuck in that place. So if you're able to break that isolation and allow them to actually recognize that support is out there, that is extremely important. If you feel like you don't know what to say, and you're afraid that if you say something you might make things worse, what's really important to know is that even saying that you're concerned, that you care about that person, and you're there if they want to talk, is a very important thing and can be very helpful to that person. Sometimes people are worried that if they say something, they will be the ones who are in danger, and we would say that just in that case, there are chains of support you can reach out to. So in a workplace, that might be a manager, a supervisor, or if you receive threats, to go to the police. Sometimes people are worried about confidentiality within the workplace, and that's why we feel that it's really important to have policies and procedures in place. It's important to have training in the workplace so that everybody is aware that this is not something that you chat about around the water cooler when an incident is happening to a coworker. There should be specific procedures of who you speak to within the organization so that it's dealt with in a professional manner, and that only the people who need to know in order to keep a worker safe are the ones that actually have any information about that situation. Really, the best way to offer support is to make sure that it's done in a confidential manner, that it's done not in a way that's blaming the victim for any work issues. We see throughout the research how often there are impacts on work performance, but that's not a great way to approach this scenario. You don't want to say you haven't been keeping up with your workload. You do want to open the door for support by saying, I'm concerned about you. Do you want to talk? Is there something that we can do to help you? It's not your fault. Very important. Also, what not to do. So I think this has been alluded to throughout the day, and Crystal mentioned it as well. The last thing that women who are being controlled want to hear is to happen is for someone else to come in and tell them what to do. And usually the first reaction is, oh, you need to leave your partner now. And that's not the right reaction to have. There's many reasons why people choose to stay. Sometimes it is safer to stay. I think that's been said already today as well. But what you want to do is work with the individual in finding ways to keep them safe. And maybe at some point they will choose to leave, and they will very much appreciate the fact that you didn't push them in any one direction when you started. So what can expert services like women's shelters, family violence counseling agencies, and victim services offer? Risk assessment and safety planning. So they mentioned this morning that there was quite a few frontline staff, people from shelters and provincial shelter associations in the room throughout the day today. And part of that is because we were all here yesterday for a full day training on a risk assessment tool. So this is the kind of thing that women's shelters do regularly. Again, it's a skill that we need to do in our work to keep our clients safe. So that is something that we're very willing to share. So we're the type of people that you could call in when an individual has been experiencing abuse so that we could sit down with them and conduct risk assessment, then safety planning. If it is a sort of situation where the individual needs to get away immediately from their partner, shelters offer emergency shelter for up to 6 weeks. There's no charge associated with that, and there's a lot of support offered by the staff as well as systems navigation. Often when the women get there, they just are so overwhelmed. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. And having a shelter worker sit down with them and just, help them take a deep breath. These are your options. Which way do you want to go, and how can we help you? Those are the kind of services that they're going to get in a women's shelter. The other thing that we could potentially do, our organization, PAS, actually offers the Make It Our Business training program. We were certified. Barb McCory came out to Saskatchewan and worked with Crystal and myself so that we are able to offer that training program to business. So we actually have a partnership with the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce where they are bringing their members in for regular training, and we're delivering that training. So you can do that sort of formal training through an organization. You can invite local shelter staff to come to your staff meeting or to make presentations for orientation for new staff. You can go to your local service providers to have leaflets available, pamphlets, information on what services are available locally, so that if, again, a situation comes up, that information is available before the need for it actually arises. One of the most important things about having this discussion in workplaces is how it can help reduce stigma around disclosing violence. And I have 2 little anecdotes to share about how that has happened within the time that we at PALS have been doing this work. The first one was when we approached the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce about the work that we were doing, and we really wanted to partner with them to get this information out to their members. So we did a 1-hour Make It Our Business presentation to the Chamber board. We were pitching it, and we wanted them to take it forward to their members. I got back to my office, and about an hour later, I got a phone call from the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce saying, after hearing our presentation, one of their employees had disclosed that she was in a violent situation with her partner, and she was afraid he could actually come into the workplace, and he wanted support around dealing with that. This worker had been afraid to actually mention that until we were there doing our presentation. My other anecdote is that we did a 1-year pilot project with one of our partners that was the Saskatchewan Government Employees Union. We did it with the SGU as an employer. And we went through their policies and procedures and looked at the union contract and looked at their physical building and sort of did a safety audit, worked with them, including doing training for the majority of the staff. And we also did a pre and post survey of the employees to see what their impression was about the safety of the organization. Would they feel comfortable disclosing if they were experiencing intimate partner violence? And at after the pilot, when we did the survey again, one of the respondents had commented, I had been in an abusive relationship earlier while still working at this workplace, and at that time I didn't feel comfortable coming forward to say that I had been. But after now, I feel like the culture in the workplace has changed, and if I was in that situation again, I would disclose. So we could see that actually worked. So as I mentioned, we at PAS are certified to do the Make It Our Business program. That was developed by Western Education, those fabulous people that have organized this this symposium today. And so different provinces have different training tools that they're using. Ontario does Make It Our Business, and we in Saskatchewan have adopted it, but other locations may have different training programs. But I think there pretty much is something available in every province. So the difference about that from just a general training on what is intimate partner violence and how maybe to best support people is that this training is very specific to the workplace. It has some amazing videos in it that really outline what some scenarios look like in the workplace, like things that can actually happen. And when we go through these scenarios with the people that we're training, they're often almost flabbergasted. I mean, it's so realistic, and yet people just really don't know how they would respond. And again, I think this was mentioned by someone earlier today, but we do get the participants to role play the scenario. So, you know, you're the person whose partner just showed up in the office, and you're the coworker who has to explain that this happened, you know, and it's awkward, and people try and have this conversation and they realize it's not as easy as they think it might be. So practicing it, going through it, can really make people more comfortable when it comes to actually dealing with a situation in real life. The sessions can be tailored. We do everything from 1 hour to a full day, and there is a 2-day one available. We've never actually done that one ourselves, but we were trained to deliver the 2-day training. Often the challenge there has to do with employers maybe not being willing to give up the work time of their staff to really invest in that. But one of the things that we've noticed since we started doing this is people will call us in for the 1 hour, or they'll attend a 1 hour that we're doing somewhere else. And then before too long, we get a call from that workplace and they say, you know what, we want you guys to come into our workplace and do a half day or a full day, because they're now recognizing how valuable that training is. There are templates for model policies and procedures that workplaces can have. And again, when you watch some of these videos and you think, as you're watching them, oh my God, if only there had been a policy in place, this never would have happened. And so it's really a great illustration for different scenarios that you might not think about until something bad has happened. And we firmly believe this is what we're all about, prevention. You want to think about what could happen. It's just good risk management. You think about what could happen before it happens, and you put measures into place so it can't happen. Conducting workplace audits. So coming into a workplace and looking around and saying, okay, if you're the receptionist in a company where it's open to the public, you're going to have a very different safety plan put in place than if you're somebody working out back in the warehouse. So looking at that, looking at what kind of security measures in place. Do people prop the back door open when they go out for a cigarette? Or is there some kind of a code on the door so that nobody can get in without being noticed? Things like even, you know, to the point of what sort of security measures, like training for specific individuals is another thing that could be very helpful. So who needs that more specific training? Certainly HR personnel would need the longer training, and perhaps the receptionist needs the additional training. Perhaps it's the people, if you have security personnel, perhaps they're the ones that need additional training. So it can be very much tailored to the individual organization. One of the things that we found has been most valuable about the work, we've been doing this for over 3 years now, and the partnerships that we have developed as a community-based agency doing this work has been incredible. So Crystal mentioned that we have been getting quite a bit of media around this issue, and we feel it's really raised the awareness of the impact of intimate partner violence on workers in the workplace, at least, you know, certainly in Saskatchewan. We find people coming to us to ask for the training. I mentioned our arrangement that we have with the Sask Chamber of Commerce. We've also worked very closely with the labor movement. So we had Saskatchewan Federation of Labor was one of our partners going in to the project itself. And as a result of that, we've done a lot of training with the different unions. It started with the Federation of Labor, and then now it's spilling out, and we're getting CUPE was the last one. We've done some longer training with them, and it just keeps building. So, more specific things about shelters. We're available 24/7, right? There's no time of the day or night where there's not somebody there waiting to take a call to offer help and support. And I think that's just really helpful for people to know. It surprises me, because I've been doing this work for so long, that sometimes people don't know there's a shelter in their community. So even to get that information out. You don't need to stay in the shelter to receive services as well. You can go in and talk to the staff. You can phone and get advice that way. You also don't need to have experienced physical violence. Shelters very much recognize that psychological, verbal, financial violence are all equally harmful. Some shelters might have 1-800 numbers. But another thing to note is that most shelters will accept a collect call. So we've tried to reduce barriers to access for services as much as possible. Shelters don't describe to call display. Its confidentiality is very key, and it's a key component of the work that we do. And again, if in a rural area, it would be important to find out who actually is the expert in your area. And a really good place to do that is by going to sheltersafe.ca. It's a clickable map of Canada that you can zoom in on it and find the services closest to you. They only list shelters, they don't list counseling services, but if you did call the shelter that was the closest to you geographically, they would also be able to tell you what other services might be available if you weren't looking for actual physical shelter. I gave up looking at my notes and just reamed through that. So.